supply to this, so the other side of the fan, if you will. There was a question of occupant load now that we've modified the building design and have moved down a path of elimination of the use of the old side of the building. That occupant letter was sent to the school district for forwarding to the city fire inspector, but it essentially identifies, according to the current building code, an occupant load over, I forget the number, Paul, 1,200 students or something more than you.
1247.
1247. So again, no question on occupancy load given the size of the building, the number of exits, et cetera, et cetera. So that moves forward. On this Monday, the clean out of the basement began, and despite some slow starts I'll get into on the next slide, it is looking good. I don't have any pictures of it from yesterday, but I was there and met with some school officials as well, and that's moving along. So where does that take us? Once the clean out is done and all of the junk has been removed, abatement will begin on friable asbestos that's inside of that room. That is anticipated to take about a week to 10 days. That'll start on Monday. The design that Harold has will be done in early April for the supply duct, and then he will commence. And I think his schedule is somewhere in the 4 to 5 week range to build out that ductwork. Ultimately, the school would have to approve the design and move forward with the installation in early May. So that's kind of where we're at. I'll just bring up a slide that you guys are familiar with, but for the environmental task force folks that may not have been on the Monday meeting, so we're clear on what we're talking about, this plenum number 1 area is the fan for the new building. You can envision air starts at this chimney, comes down through a duct, went into a big open room, and then comes either into this side of the fan or this side of the fan. It gets pushed out through another duct that goes, through the school building on this side, which is sealed and completely isolated and been repaired. But the supply for this auditorium comes in a duct and then essentially just dumps into this room. So what the board approved was the distribution system, if you will, for this supply air, so it doesn't just fill this room and push air into other areas. I think Bill asked me a question yesterday. Dr. Cacciardi used the term pristine air. Could we have just fill the room with hot air and let it percolate up? Yes, that would have been deemed acceptable, but it's incredibly inefficient, and it really is, pushing air would create a positive pressure inside this room and push air into areas that we're not even sure what exists in, all these little pathways and channels and areas. So this assures us that the clean air that we're bringing from the outside that's heated can be distributed directly into the auditorium, without any interconnection to anything else. So that's a recap. Current issues that we have so far this week: the clean out continues. It's a little slow because the dumpster people are only working half days because of COVID, and they're asking for 2 dumpsters a day. They're getting 1. They're asking for a 40-yard dumpster. They're getting a 30-yard dumpster. So it's just, Paul started this is unprecedented time. I mean, I don't know who we can yell at, but it's just a little slower than we would have liked. But they're making the best of it. They're pre-staging equipment, and that way when the dumpster gets there, it gets loaded pretty quickly. We did identify some documents. There's records there. They haven't been accessed probably in 10, 15, or 20, maybe longer. But they seem to me to be sensitive kind of records that need to be shredded. So we'll work with Paul or the district officials just to make sure that those records are treated, you know, an appropriate manner, however you want them handled. We certainly don't want them thrown in the dumpster with old desks. Electronics need to be segregated for two reasons. Number one, from a disposal standpoint, they may contain materials that the landfill doesn't want in terms of mercury or other lead, heavy metals. But secondly is that they're fixed assets for the district, so they have to be accounted for from an inventory and accountability standpoint. So they're being segregated now, and I'm sure Paul is working with the IT folks to identify those things, make sure they're fully depreciated, whatever you have to do to write them off. Again, I got to imagine a 15-year-old PC sitting in the basement of that has got to have very little value, but we certainly want to treat it.
Yep,
A
you're
question, or
100%
is that
right.
just background?
I'm not sure. Could everybody mute their, if you don't mind, if everybody can mute, because we can hear a TV in the background. It's a little distracting. Thanks.
Thanks, Missy.
Sure.
HVAC access, interesting, this picture to the right, this area represents the fresh air chimney. So the other side of this is where the fresh air comes in, but this is actually in the duct. When you go inside of the auditorium duct, it's actually, you can stand up and it's a big metal box. But this pipe, small amount of pipe is in there. That needs to be removed as part of the abatement that Datum is going to do. In order to gain access to this, there's some dampers, louvers that have to be taken out. Those are going to be removed on Monday so that abatement contractor can access this piece of pipe. This area is what Paul refers to as the fallout shelter. So you've seen the pictures. This is the top side of that. This would be the auditorium side. This would be the new building side. What happens is, you know, this is just macadam, so it cracks and water leaks and drains leak, and then you end up with a mass of water and junk and mold and everything down in the below side of this. So Paul and Carl are going to take that on in the spring to reseal that area. It's not a major repair, but there's got to be some maintenance there to just ensure that stormwater collects here, goes through the appropriate drains and gets displaced instead of leaking into that area. And that will greatly improve the conditions below. And then the last piece of this is just the EPA letter. So because there's some atypical non-adhera corrective actions going on with the old building particularly, the board felt as though they want to have EPA concurrence, approval, review of the plan. And Joe has a draft of that. I know he's working on, we've seen that and circulated that over the past few days. So if Joe is on, he was going to try to jump on. He may get on here in a minute. He can update us, but I'm sure that letter is going to go in a couple of days to the school district. I'm sure their solicitor will take a look at it, school will take a look at it, and then it'll go off to the EPA, basically looking for a head nod on what it is that the district wants to do and the board wants to do, which is occupy the new side and the auditorium, understanding that the old side was formerly under the same management plan, but is now being isolated and no longer considered a school structure, even though there'll be just a firewall separating it, but it will be a separate building. So that's the last piece of the puzzle and the most critical piece, given the enforcement abilities of the EPA, including and not limited to criminal enforcement. So that's it. I did have a couple other, just refresh our memory. Environmental hazards are much more than just asbestos. We have a whole bunch of stuff here, not the least of which now is the COVID and disinfecting and application of controlled, pesticides and disinfectants to kill the virus that is, in the buildings. So we can talk through that, and then just a little mission, vision discussion. Hopefully we have, and then I do have some resources. So if we make this public, folks can see. We've mentioned the EPA schools toolkit for indoor air quality. There's a host of others. Sites that are people dealing with the same kind of issues that your task force is dealing with. So there are precedent out there. There are other organizations that kind of have embarked upon this same task to make sure that their buildings are safe for their children. So there's a lot of resources that we can build from. So with that said, I'll kind of open it up to questions, comments, concerns. You tell me what you got, and then somebody can take the reins as we move forward here.
Hey, Rocco, it's Joe. Am I on now?
Yeah, Joe, I can hear you.
Thanks, guys. And thanks to everybody for letting me participate in your group. I just had two quick comments. One is I've had two discussions with the EPA to move some of the asbestos issues forward, and I do have to fill in the administration on those, but that project is moving forward. I think more importantly for this group, this is just my opinion, I think more importantly for this group, looking at some programs such as the EPA tools for schools, presentations and materials that have just recently been updated. So I think we sent some information around on that particular program, but they were just updated in 2020 and addressing the larger issues, or thinking about the larger issues, the systemic issues and the issues related to air quality across the board might be an interesting task for this group to look at. Think of the school system as your body. If you've got a cut on your finger, it's pretty easy to see where it's at. It's pretty easy to put a Band-Aid on it, take care of it, put some sanitizer on it or whatever. And that's kind of what's happening in some of your focus projects now. It's not necessarily as easy to have a whole health outlook on things. And that's really what some of the EPA programs do. Looking at, as I mentioned before, how you get to that pristine standard, the higher quality air that kind of relates across the board. We're all breathing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 18 times a minute, depending upon our age. So we're putting stuff in through the air into our bodies all the time. So it's some really good things to start to look at, because I think for this group, there might be some really, you guys know the facilities the best, there might be some really good recommendations that you can provide to the board to consider as you move forward. So I'll stop there and just say thanks for letting me participate. I'll go on mute and listen in if there's anything from me, but Brock will give it back to you. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Cacciardi. All right, so I'm not sure if you guys are seeing my browser and the EPA site, or if you're still seeing the resource slide.
We're seeing the EPA site.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, because I have two monitors. One has got one on it. This has got another on it. So again, this is, I've mentioned before, there's a little host of things you guys can be addressing as an organization, as an entity. But at this point, I guess I'd kind of like to turn it over to somebody. I'm not sure who is the chairperson or identified individual to lead us, but.
Well, Rocco, thank you for that segue.
Right.
We're on the same wavelength here.
Thank you.
I understand from Mrs. Orr that Mr. Cobley has stepped forward to serve as chair of this committee, and I certainly appreciate his willingness to do that. And my opinion would be to ask Ms. Hume to act as secretary so that she can liaise information between this committee and the board, and keep some notes and bring them forward to us to report the activity of this committee. So I think we can approve that, run that by my colleagues on the board on Monday per our policy. But unless anyone has any objections in this group, that would certainly be my recommendation to move forward here so that Mr. Cobley and Ms. Hume can work together to continue to schedule these meetings and set agendas and the priorities of this group.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm very appreciative of that.
Thank you, Katie. I do have one comment on the presentation, if I may. Back to those records, Mr. DePietro. Those, if they are student records, we must keep them for 99 years and beyond. So I don't know who's looking at those records, but it is by law that we must keep student records. So,
Doctor, I had Joe Haney. I directed him to go through those and actually see what type of records they are. I'm not exactly sure.
okay.
There was so much. This is over a 5,000 square foot area. There was so much junk, I guess, so many things piled in that area that we really didn't have a handle on what was in there until they started bringing it out. They found filing cabinets that had records in them. And again, I can't even tell you how long they've been there. But Joe Haney has, I asked him to go through those, see what's critical as far as record retention. If it's student work, like if it's old tests, like we're not hanging on those. But if there's student transcripts and student records, obviously, yeah, we're going to hang on to those. But we have cabinets full of them down there.
Yeah.
Just make sure, Paul, make sure they go, we have that record retention document with what
Yes.
it is and how many years we have to keep it. I sent that to all the principals, so they should all have it. So make sure he checks every document with that record retention document.
Yeah, my
Will do.
concern is if there's employee, I have no idea what their filing system was like back then. If they're employee records of, whatever, I do know through the years when it comes Social Security time, people need verification. And so we have to keep those types of records and just transcripts, nothing else. We don't have to keep student tests or any of that stuff. But
Right.
Those are the two important things. And unfortunately, we have to keep them like forever and ever. So just be careful about that, okay?
Yeah,
That's
we didn't.
all I have to say.
We did not start the disposal of that at all. We didn't engage anybody to shred anything. Right now, we're just having those all put aside until Mr. Haney is able to get through all of those.
Perfect. Thank you.
That leads to one question I did have, and I believe Mr. Schuster had this conversation with Dr. Finan, and I think perhaps some of my other colleagues may have even brought it to Ro's attention. Is there any value in any of the material that is being removed from this room? I noticed some items in the photographs, some wood doors, things like that. The wood desks are there. I realize the condition of the way this was stored may have rendered it useless, but has there been any discussion or thought to, bringing in a salvage company or, any kind of secondhand people who might deal in secondhand or what's the word I'm looking for? Like architectural things like that.
That I don't know. But what I can tell you is that Mr. Haney's been on site during the removal of all this, and anything that he thinks he has value, they're wiping down and they're going to attempt to reuse. I know there was some like art stools or some, I guess, stools from a science lab that he was very interested in keeping. So Joe is much more familiar with what's in that just because he's there on site, but he's kind of been going through a lot of the materials himself and kind of saving what he thinks could be saved. To the point about, architectural value, I really can't speak to that. I'm way out over my skis on that one. But you know, I think that Joe has made a good faith effort to make sure that anything of value is being kept. Oh, there's a picture of the records.
Yeah, these are just some of the pictures that they're segregating, you know, stuff. Again, you guys will sort that out. In terms of architectural value, there's nothing there that I saw of any architectural value. It's mostly junk. Again, here's the electronics that's just being, you know, stockpiled. The only thing that I know they wanted to keep was there's some stools. These are some art stools. I know may be difficult to look at, but they have value. They're easy to clean. They're in, you know, good shape, so that they can be repurposed somewhere in the district, I'm sure. But the vast majority of stuff was, you know, old metal filing cabinets that are dinged up, and wooden boxes and cardboard that's moldy and rusty. So there really wasn't much value in anything there. But the district has people. Bill, you've been in there. Carl's been in there. So as stuff comes out, if it's got some value, it's being set aside.
I
Great.
think
Thank you.
the conversation Director Schuster and I had was if we did have things of value, but we didn't need them, maybe we could create an online auction for them. That was the direction we were talking about.
Okay.
And not just for what we find in Northeast Intermediate, but throughout the district when we start to clean. That's a direction a number of districts go. Not to just stockpile the stuff, but then to, you know, at least have an auction and collect some dollars and make them purposeful or repurpose them for folks. So
Sure.
just to keep that in mind.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
But, and Paul, just while we are going through those records and things, as a member of the Historical Society of the county, if there were photographs or stuff that wasn't technically stuff that the district had to keep legally, but that may have quite significant historical interest for the school, like school photos, that, you know, awards and stuff. I think the historicals, if anyone had the courtesy to just put them aside in a box, the Historical Society would be very grateful.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
And folks, having been in there, I'd only mention that there are probably 3 types of things that have come out or will come out. Things that are okay to auction or use, things that need to be cleaned or wiped in some manner that can be reused or repurposed. And then there's a couple of things that you won't want to use because they're old chemicals that are in there. So I know Paul and your guys were looking at that stuff, so I'd just be a little bit cautious of that.
Yeah, the chemicals that were all identified have been removed properly, and you know, the company came and disposed of them. So I'm very happy that the hazmat materials are out of there. So that happened prior to the clean out beginning this week, and you know, they did a significant amount of cleaning out already. And like Rocco said, anything that's thought to have any value or needs to be inventoried has been put aside. Anything that's just been purely garbage has been, you know, put into the dumpsters.
Excellent.
Moving on from the Northeast situation.
Before we do that, can I ask a question about Northeast? This is Richard Cobley.
Sure, certainly.
Sure. With respect to the EPA engagement, we're looking for what's, you know, we refer to it as approval or concurrence, and I guess informally we would call it a head nod. It's, given it's an atypical situation, what is the expected response from the EPA to this letter? Are we asking very explicitly, can you provide us in writing your opinion or recommendation, or do we intend to ask that for some sort of explicit response back from them?
Is Dr. Cacciardi still on? Dr. Cacciardi, are you on that call?
Yeah, let me take that one if it's okay with you.
Yes, please.
So what we're asking EPA to do is accept a revision of the management plan, knowing that there is a different, there's a different framework for the management plan now that the school building is not an entire area, it's really half or 3/4 of a building. And knowing that the plans that were originally identified for the asbestos in there may no longer be valid, and now we're coming up with a different plan. So what we're asking them to do is provide an opinion, and I think that's too strong of a word, receive the documentation, comment on it, and move forward from there.
So you're going to be providing them the updated management plan as well with this letter?
Correct. It'll be, well, the management plan will be amended based upon any comments we get back from the EPA. But that's the idea, to provide an updated management plan for the asbestos that's in the building.
So the content of the revisions to the management plan will be documented in the letter you're sending to the EPA.
Correct.
And then it's a matter of incorporating those changes and any comments from the EPA back into your management plan.
Correct. I think a good way of looking at it is think of the information to the EPA as a strategic document, whereas the management plan is then a tactical document that you follow.
Yeah,
understood. Concurring with the strategy. That makes sense?
So it does. And I've worked with other government regulators, and my concern would be, I know the ones I've worked with would be, it'd be hard pressed to get them to put something in writing and comment back like that. However, if you feel confident, do you feel confident that you'll get comments back to this letter?
I think we will get something back. I'm not sure that we will get, I'm not confident just yet that we will get specific instructions from the EPA. I am confident that we'll get information that says we've received your information, we've taken it not under consideration, we've placed it appropriately. I'm sure we'll get that kind of a letter. Past that information, I'm not quite sure what we'll get. Although I have to tell you, I've had 2 or 3 discussions with the EPA, so we're involved in those discussions right now to see if we can make it as detailed as possible.
Okay, so you get some form of information back, maybe not as much a hard line as you'd like from the EPA. At that point, as I'm assuming Gachardi and Associates will be the author of the management plan. It'll be essentially signed off by the school district.
I think you want us to put the technical documentation in, although I'll let, I guess, Paul answer that question. But I think you want us to put the technical documentation into the plan and the letters, but it'll be the school district who is the signatory for them.
Right. And at that point, given that feedback from the EPA, the update of the plan, at that point, essentially I think it's the asbestos coordinator, the coordinator of this program that's controlled by this plan, will have enough, accountability and I guess we'll take responsibility for implementing that plan at that point. I guess we'll be good enough at that point to we incorporate those actions. Is that the criteria to say, okay, we've done all these things in the plan now, the school's safe to reopen?
Correct. We're in the investigation stage right now, but I would firmly believe that we'll have a direction from the EPA, whether that's an informal nod or an official letter. I'm not going to say in the short term, but we'll have some information about it in the next couple of weeks. And that may not be the letter that we're looking for, but it'll be an answer that you're not going to get a letter if that's the case.
Okay. And if we don't get a letter, the primary way to adhere to the regulation is to have a management plan in place and being in compliance with that plan. So that then at that point, we would continue to proceed to update that document, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I guess my last, more of a comment. Thank you for your answers, by the way. given the, the strange times with, the work from home situation, things like that, perhaps it'd be timely to start updating the management plan ahead of, or concurrently with waiting for the letter from the EPA. That might be a suggestion I would offer.
I think that's a great idea. And I think that's actually happening now based upon the actions that Paul and the contractors have taken over the last couple of weeks to months as well now. So what remains is to put that, puzzle is too strong of a word, but to put the pieces into the appropriate format based upon any of the strategic comments that we might have coming back. And also to make sure it works for you too. So that's then a discussion with Paul and that level to make sure that 6 month, that the tactical things can happen.
Right, like we're just about done with our 6 month reassessments. Carl Puglisi is our a designated person for our school district. He's been going out doing those 6 month informal checks, which are required. So we're just about done with that. He'll be putting that documentation together. Things are actually moving pretty smoothly outside of Northeast, and I don't want to be, I'm cautiously optimistic that we're kind of seeing a light at the end of the tunnel in regards to Northeast Intermediate. Ideally, we would want to reoccupy the whole space, but that's just not a reality right now with the old side and the ventilation system on the old side. But the fact that we got, the occupancy calculations of, just shy of 1,250, and knowing where we are with the abatement, that the last real big abatement project on the newer side is what they're going to do underneath that auditorium. We could kind of see, again, not to repeat myself, but we see the light at the end of the tunnel with Northeast, that I could see us reoccupying that space not too far down the road.
Paul, maybe this is a good time where you can update the committee, because Carl has been, from what I'm told, Carl has been doing the 6 month reassessments. So maybe just give a brief summary of where he is with that, with all of the buildings.
I think, I don't want to speak to things I'm not. He told me just a couple days ago, I think he had like 1.5 schools left, because it's not quick when you're going through and you're identifying all the spots within the management plan and doing an assessment. But he's has them just about complete. I don't have the complete list in front of me. But I mean, the ones that had to be done, because our 3-year assessments did not all come out at the same time. So they were staged. So he's been staging and following the same kind of timeline with the 6 month reassessments. The next big thing on our list, getting the bids for summer work out, because we have, certainly there's no real emergency work left in our buildings, but we want to get our bids out for summer work. And that's kind of what's on the forefront for me over the next week, is making sure that those bids get out, because we need to start soliciting bids so abatement companies can get to work on June 10th, or earlier if the governor makes the call that we're not going back. But we're going to run out of time real quick unless we get those out.
Okay, thank you.
And Paul, I certainly agree that if you're late with the release of those documents, you're going to run into abatement contractors that are tight because they're already accepting work. Everybody wants to get stuff done now and over the summer. So it may increase your cost if you're late to the game, if you can get all of your work done that needs to be done. I want to speak to what the package is. I know we weren't involved in it, but I know it's sizable and it's broad in its scope, but it covers a lot of school buildings. So can you just speak to what those bid packages include?
there's 5 separate packages actually, just because the calculated time on the work was approximately 150 days. So they got split down into 5 separate packages of each in 30-day segments. It essentially encompassed anything that had a removal priority of like 3 and 4, because we addressed our 1s and 2s, or mostly all of our 2s for removal priority from the management plans. But this would also incorporate anything that had a removal priority of a 3 or a 4. So this will be in just about, there will be work done in just about every one of our facilities, except the 4 facilities that that we know do not contain any asbestos. But the packages are sizable. Like, we're going to have to set up, obviously, we're going to have to set up building walkthroughs for abatement companies to go through and actually examine it, because it's sizable. It'll take a lot of time for these abatement companies to put these packages together.
So do we need to, what do we need to do to move on to the next stage?
Well, I'm gonna work with Pat Laffey so we could set up a time to, well, first of all, to get the packages out, and then set up, within the package, we have to figure out a time that they could get into each building to look. So I'll work with Pat Laffey and Carl on setting that up. And then once we do get our bids, then at that point, that'll obviously go to the board for approval, because I'm also assuming that this is going to be, quite a costly endeavor. Now, a lot of the things, it may incorporate things that have to happen after abatement happens. So, for instance, if there's flooring, asbestos, tile that was a removal priority of a 4 in a building, which was not an immediate danger, but we're addressing over the summer, then there's also going to be, we have to have flooring contractors ready to come in and put in some flooring after that tile's been abated. So there are definitely some things that, we got to get moving on to make sure that by the time we get ready to open for the 2021 school year, that, everything is complete on these lists. But if we don't get moving on getting these packages out now, we're going to struggle. By the time these packages come back in, hopefully we have an engineer of record that can oversee a lot of that work. But that's, you're going to be voting on that, I think, on Monday.
Okay.
Yes, that's going on the agenda for Monday.
And we're gonna continue to engage Kachardi to oversee the abatement work at this point. Unless obviously the board has full discretion on that, but they've been overseeing all of our environmental work to this point.
Trust me, I don't know if I speak for the board, but I speak for me. The thought of Dr. Kachardi and his firm leaving us at this point would be like being abandoned in the middle of the Antarctic.
Thanks for your nice comments. I appreciate it. But we're here to help.
I have a question, or a couple questions regarding Northeast. I don't know if they go to Paul or who they go to, but Paul, I think the new side of the building had a number of exits that were unusable.
Yes.
Are they taken care of, or?
That's another project we're actually working on. We put up the netting so they could be used as emergency exits. Right now, they're not cleared to be used as a main entrance, I'll say, for the amount of traffic. We did get some quotes on better securing them using scaffolding. That was part of deficiencies were found in those porticos, I want to say last fall. And I want to say at the November board meeting, the work on that was tabled by the school board. We're in effect, we have a meeting later today talking about what are we going to talk about at the next school board meeting. I was going to bring up that I want to resubmit those proposals to get the work done on the porticos outside of there. They have to reset, I guess, those stones that are above the porticos.
Right.
Right now, no, they are not cleared as an everyday entrance. They are cleared still as an emergency exit, but using just the new side, I'd feel much more comfortable if they were just absolutely cleared as an everyday entrance.
I would assume a reoccupancy would rely on that, wouldn't it?
I don't know that, because we had the fire department through there and he was okay. I mean, we had the fire inspector through there and he said he was okay with how things were. And talking to Joe Haney, we have some plans in place if we have to use a different entrance as the main entrance. But my goal is to get those. That entrance on Gibson Street is the ideal front entrance of that school.
Yeah.
And it probably should have been all along.
Dan,
But
I'll just speak to that. Paul and I have talked about that numerous times. I'm very concerned about it. I feel as though, that has to be done before we put kids back into the school. So
I agree.
I don't feel comfortable with it. There's netting there. That doesn't make me feel any more comfortable with it. So yes, it's a concern of mine. And yes, we're going to need to make a decision we're going to need to present something to the board again. And they're going to have to decide how to move forward. But it's my recommendation that it needs to be fixed before we put kids into the building.
I would agree entirely.
But that'll come up at the next. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't mean to interject here, but just with a conversation Paul and I had about this previously, it was my understanding that the scaffolding was an option in place, or in addition to the netting, to improve the safety, certainly not get us to where we might like to be with a full repair. But I think it would be helpful if we understood the cost of that scaffolding as a stopgap measure.
I just got it. I just got it the other day.
Right. So, I mean, if
literally within the last 24 hours, the cost of the scaffolding to get it assembled, it was like $5,100, or just shy of $5,200, and then $600 every month that we have it.
Okay.
The cost of getting the bids and getting the study done and overseeing the project, from the engineering firm we had engaged, I think was $6,000. Okay. So at this point with the COVID, I hate to say this even out loud, but I'm not sure we're going to get back to school this school year. And that pains me to say that as an educator. But maybe we just move ahead with getting bids to do the portico project and getting that done. And then if we do see a date, we're going to go back to school May 15th and Northeast is ready to go at that point, then we engage the scaffolding contractor. But we might have a shot at getting that work done, depending on what construction companies are working. Some are cleared to work, some are not. Like, I know the abatement companies right now could still be in there and working. I'm not sure about every construction company.
Realistically, Paul, I don't think it makes any sense at all not to go ahead and do the work. From my memory of that quote that we had, it was under 20,000, and I think it wasn't the quotes we had in November.
It was that the quote put in front of the board that was tabled was it was a report from Greenman Peterson, who did the structural study, and it was through Palumbo, where they were going to oversee the project and solicit the bids. And I think the quote was about $6,000. And then they were going to clear the structural upon completion, that the job was complete. And at that point, that it was tabled in November, just saying that we were going to revisit that in the spring.
Yeah, great.
Because at that point, they were not needed as primary entrances.
Yeah, absolutely. If you wouldn't mind keeping me in the loop on those kind of, on where we go with that. But I think that my feeling would be with you that we should, if at all possible, move to get a permanent solution.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring it up I'm going to bring it up on Monday. That was on my agenda of items for Monday.
Okay. With the existing entrance that goes in, as I understand it, through the old building, will that be taken completely out of commission?
We're not going to utilize the old space at all.
So that old entrance would be gone and...
Correct.
Okay, thanks. We can talk about that. It's not really this committee thing. With just to go on another issue, I know at Bancroft, when we went into the basement at Bancroft, we found a lovely little treasure trove of people's mementos going back several decades. Is now a good opportunity to do an inventory throughout the district of the schools to see what other areas like the ones at Northeast and the ones at Bancroft exist?
Probably, but right now we're kind of shut down. The governor, obviously has a stay-at-home order, so our maintenance staff is only working when there's food service going on.
Okay.
So we don't even have the manpower at this point to do that. I'm sure there's more spots in this district. I mean, with the amount of facilities we have, I'm sure there's more spots that people have stuff jammed into. Oh, just from years and years and years.
So,
Director Hume, I did send out a directive. Paul, maybe you remember the directive to the principals to start cleaning up the basement. I don't know, that might have been a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that we were going to start doing walkthroughs of all the buildings.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
Dr. Cacciardi did send me an email saying that there was, clutter in the basement. So that directive did go out. I know that principals were directing their maintenance staff to go around and start to clean up, inventory what was downstairs, and then COVID-19 came. So the walkthroughs that we had planned, Paul and I were going to go around to the buildings, did not happen, but that directive did go out.
Well, thanks, Missy. I think that's great. I suppose my feeling is at the moment that cleaning house, in both figuratively and literally, is only going to help us right through, both with the EPA showing willing and improving the air quality.
Yes, we agree. We agree, and
Yeah.
and we need to work on that. And as soon as we get back to whatever normal is again, we will definitely get back to that task.
Thanks, Missy.
Sure.
Dan, I want to make sure you get a chance to continue your questions. I think I interrupted you and we got on a different track.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. The only other question I had was, that old building at Northeast truly was the heartbeat of the whole place, with the offices and the guidance, and basically all the administrative stuff happened there. What's the long-term plan for that site? Are we trying to reoccupy it? Are we not? I mean, I'm just curious as to what the long-term plan is there.
Honestly, Dan, I'm going to speak up here. I don't really think we know.
Okay.
I can't say that we know. I think, as there's a lot of discussions about building reconfiguration, what we're doing, where's the board going to put money into, are we going to invest in different buildings? There's just, I do not believe that those discussions that far out, and again, I don't want to speak for anybody, my understanding is we don't know at this point in time what is going to become of that building.
Right. At the end of the day, I'm just guessing it's a dollars and cents decision.
Yeah, well, and again, dollars and cents, what's the overall plan? We've talked about it. What's 21st century learning? What's the board's vision of where we're going? Building capacity, do we need that building? If so, are we going to invest the money in it? I mean, those are all of the conversations that obviously are happening, which Dr. Finan, you can chime in anytime. But again, we are not near ready to answer that question right now.
That's right.
If I may, we are studying it, and I think just like Superintendent McTiernan said, we're looking at all factors. I think one of the considerations is, do we need and should we keep an intermediate school in that section of the district? And at least from the Building Reconfiguration Committee, the answer has been yes. And then what size building do we need there? As you all know, that used to be a high school. Do we need a building of that size? You know, I think the original size was it could house up to 2,200 students or something like that. We don't need that size, but it will come down very simply to how much money the district has and what they can afford. Right now, they're broke, to be very blunt, they're broke. And so long term, it's wonderful that we can bring the children back to a section of that building and make it usable for school. Long term, the district has to look at all of their needs and prioritize. And that will be many discussions. So I appreciate the comment, the question. I just think it's too early to be able to give a solid answer to that.
When you say we, as far as this feasibility, is this an outside firm that's come in and is going forward, or is this just the board feasibility?
Is that question for me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. We actually, yes, it would be an outside firm to come in. Their last feasibility study that was conducted in Scranton School District was done in 2012, which was a very long time ago, as you know. They need to do one. As you know, they're very, you may or may not know, they're very costly. We do have a request in for some financial help to help pay for a feasibility study. I don't have that answer yet. Actually, there was, that just went out this week to some individuals to see if they'd be willing to get us some funding for that. So we're working on that. If not, it would be something, and generally what school districts do, they don't usually have that kind of money sitting around for a feasibility study. So what they do is roll that into a borrowing, like a bond issue or something such as that for repairs of schools. But it's time for Scranton to look at the whole picture of where they need to go with their buildings and with housing the students from each part of that school district. And we haven't done that. So that's one of the recommendations that we have made in the recovery plan, and we are now looking for help for funding that.
Is there a mandate that drives how often that feasibility is done based on population?
There's not a mandate, but what usually happens, districts generally do that every 5 to 10 years. And since we're in 2020 right now, and the last one was completed in 2012, it's time to do it now.
I agree. I just a comment, you know, anyone that's got any kids at home, it seems like there's a lot more toilets being flushed, a lot more lights being left on in my house. So because the kids are home all day. So it's going to drive up my utility costs, and I'm not worried about that. But it seems to me with all the schools shut down, the district's saving a significant amount of money in utility costs. And if it's not happening, I'm going to be amazed that we're not saving money by not operating these schools. Is that already budgeted out, and you know, or is it just, I mean, where does that money go? If the bill was supposed to be $50,000 this month and it's only 20, where does that money go? Can it be redistributed towards some of the issues that we need to get addressed? And I don't know who could answer that question, but I think it's something.
Mr. Medor, yeah, good. It's a good point. And again, let's put it this way. The money, where does it go? The money that if it's not spent is in the GOB. I mean, the general operating budget.
Mm-hmm.
we are looking at right now, we're using all of our buildings, and each day food distribution is happening in all. I'll just give you a little background of the discussions that we're having. Food distribution is happening at every building. And obviously we want to do that for our kids because they're our number one priority. So we are trying to accommodate as many families as we possibly can. Now that the governor has changed his order, and we are closed until further notice, we are going to look at our food distribution process and possibly change that so that each of our buildings isn't open every day, so that we can do exactly what you're saying and actually shut the buildings down. Because right now they're not shut down. There's people in there every day. Food service workers are in there every day doing what they need to do. So to answer your question, do I have an answer for you as to, are we saving money? I'm not really sure. And until the bills roll in and Mr. Laffey can tell me that answer. But we have talked about that, possibly completely shutting the buildings down, moving the food distribution to other locations. And then you're right, we would probably see an increase, a decrease, I should say. So to answer your question right now, I don't have those figures for you, but yes, we are talking about that.
I understand that you don't have that. I mean, there are a lot of other things that support the district that aren't being supported. And I'm sure some of those are contracts that, you know, don't take these things into consideration, like busing. I'm sure that, you know, we're not doing as much busing. So, and I'm sure that contracts prevent them from getting underpaid. But it just seems to me like, you know, if the governor is saying we ain't going to be in school, you know, until whenever, or we may not go back to school this year, it seems like all these other businesses are taking a hit.
Right.
It seems like busing could certainly take a hit too.
Yeah, well, there was actually a law that came out that actually bus contractors are going to get paid, similar to what's coming out regarding, you know, nobody can lose pay over all of this. So yes, we understand what you're saying, but there's laws that pass now that make sure the bus contractors do get paid.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm just looking at, you know, this is trying to make lemons out of lemonade here, I guess, you know.
Yeah. No, I understand. And you're asking.
Kids can't go to school. It seems to me like there's got to be some cost savings somewhere. And I'm not worried about it. It is what it is. But, you know, changing the subject a little bit, just getting back, the basement's all cleaned out. That's good. The ductwork's going to get installed. Talking about a feasibility study, which is something that we talked about last meeting, and the AHERA management plans for ACM and air quality and whatever else. And it sounded like you got Mr. Puglisi, I believe, you know, that stuff's coming forward.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. I understand that you know, the governor said the schools are shut down and you can't be in them and all that good stuff. What stops me from going in there? I'm not an employee other than access. What stops the ETF from going there and helping in any way that you need to evaluate these schools? You know, all the trash that we're talking about, all this stuff, you know, is it something that we could go in and, I mean, if it's just debris, isn't that part of the environment?
Well, the only thing that I'm going to say is the only people that are supposed to be are essential personnel. I don't know that, like, you know, from my standpoint, if a teacher needs to go to a building to retrieve their materials and it's less than 10 people, then I have been told by the Department of Health that I can allow them to do that because they're essential personnel. I don't know that I can verify that you're essential personnel. Again, you know, these are the discussions that I've been having with the Department of Health, the Scranton Police Department. You know, there's a group that now that I'm part of in the background. So I guess to answer your question is I wouldn't be able to say that you're essential right now.
Isn't the entire county under a stay-at-home order?
Yes,
So leaving, I think we have to have a legitimate reason to leave the house,
yes.
i.e. working in an essential capacity, going to a doctor or going out to buy food. Avoiding strangling children doesn't come under that, but should. And get exercise. I think that it's a great idea. I mean, I'm itching to volunteer and do lots of things, but if I can't leave the house, I can only do it within the confines of my own house.
Well, that's what I wanted to know, that it's not essential right now and we can't go in there. Thank you.
Correct, yes. Again, I'm not a pro at this, I'm learning, but I'm being told what I can and can't do, because I was worried about asking principals to go into the building. We made a schedule, you know, our teachers were able to go in on Friday and Monday, but it had to be less than 10 people. I had to include a maintenance person in case they needed things to be helping and carried out. So we had to really thoroughly think through a plan so that I was in compliance with what I'm being told I have to do. But the only people I'm allowed to allow into the building are essential at this point in time. And that's why our food service workers can go in, because they're identified as essential.
Okay,
I hope that answers your question.
yeah, I just wanted to find out if it had been asked. You know, can this environmental task force that has been created to assist volunteers from the community, can they have access to do things that might be necessary? If it's already been determined at the state or the city level that we are not essential, then there's no question.
I mean, I can't say that I particularly asked, can the environmental task force go in? But right now, that was not something that's my understanding that would be essential right now.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I've got one quick question. Naroda. I guess this, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, just in the future of proper maintenance of these air exchange systems, like the one that you're installing in Northeast, and I guess all of the buildings, I would like to see a schedule of cleaning and replacing filters. I mean, I don't know, according to trying to get this thing up and running, you got to show that you're cleaning these ventilation systems and you're replacing any kind of filters. That really definitely needs to be in place. And it just, if we could see something like that in the future, obviously we don't have anything like that right now, or I can't see anything like that right now, but just for that to be addressed.
Yes, I believe, Paul, Mr. Doherty, you and I have discussed that. That was on your list of, do you want to speak to that, please?
You know, preventative maintenance is one thing that was completely lacking within our organization, and that was one of the reasons that we wanted to move ahead and get an operations system in place, a work order system, so we could, you know, have directives sent out automatically about the preventative maintenance schedules. Like, I have contacted, you know, all the principals and said, hey, make sure your maintenance staff is changing your filters every 3 months, because, you know, everybody's breathing this air that's going through our buildings. As far as is that happening in all 16 or 17 facilities? I mean, I really don't have like a way to check that. I mean, I got to trust that people are doing the things they're supposed to be doing. But like, you know, having been, I worked at West Intermediate for 14 years. I made sure those filters got changed every 3 months. I think that's critically important. But you know, the system that we're going to be putting in place, our work order management system with preventative maintenance, it's going to hold people accountable, where they're going to have to essentially, as they get the task assigned, they're going to have to report back when the task was completed. So that's going to be very beneficial with our preventative maintenance schedule, with, like, for instance, with filters. That's going to be big. Simple things like, hey, you got to flush your fountains and your sinks for 30 seconds, you know, on the first of every month. We want to make sure that's getting done, because that certainly is going to help when we do, lead and water testing, because if you're regularly flushing the systems, typically you're not going to have any kind of high lead content that's going to be in the water. So those things, yes, those things are being addressed, sir.
So one of the things we did talk about, Paul, if you remember, we talked about a simple checklist that every quarterly we can make sure that they fill out until we get the work order system up and running to its capacity. We have talked about a simple checklist to ensure that those filters are changed. We know how important they are, and we're just trying to put a system in place.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, Luann.
I just want to speak to the filters being changed.
Sure.
We have to be provided the filters in order to change them. Oftentimes we don't have them to change. So I know that we changed them in December, but we just don't have them to change every one. We changed as many as we could through this COVID, but we didn't have enough to do the change.
Luann, I've never said no to a filter order.
Oh, I'm not saying you have, but in the past, we've been shut down by the filter company.
I will get filters for whoever wants them. I've never said no to a filter order, and I never will say no to a filter order. I mean, I think that is probably the most critical thing. If we keep our air filters, change regularly, that does tremendous amounts for the air quality in our buildings. If you requisition them through me, I've never said no to that, and I won't.
I agree that it's important. And when I was at Whittier, we did do it every 4 months because we had problems with those up there, which have been corrected over the years. But I think Billy Tonkin is still on that schedule. But at Scranton High, we just changed them in December. We should probably change them again.
It should be, as far as I'm concerned, it's January 1, April 1, July 1, October 1.
Okay, so I'll be putting in a request for our filters, Mr. Naroda, for Scranton High. And there are some there that I'm pretty new at Scranton High. I'm only there not quite 2 years yet. I haven't found all the places where the filters are.
Well, I think when Scranton Electric is there, have them show you, because they probably could walk you right to those spots.
Yeah, they even, and I know in Johnny Ray's room, found one that even they didn't know was there for the longest time. So we're discovering new filters all the time. I have to really find a plan somewhere that shows me where they're at. I can't find that, but we're working on it.
Are there any other questions?
Mr. Cobley, I think it's your meeting.
Yeah, I guess as far as reconvening and setting an agenda for next meeting, I think continued updates on Northeast would be good for our next meeting. Also, perhaps we could come up with suggestions for a mission statement and goals and objectives, things like that. And then probably more importantly, or a key might be, how do we communicate the proceedings of this meetings out to the broader population? Do we want to compose meeting minutes, action items, things along those lines? So I would suggest we think of those types of things as agenda items for our next meeting, as well as trying to limit the scope of the meetings as well. And again, just to propose it, things like utility expenses and busing and feasibility studies, I'm not sure they're quite within the scope of the environmental task force. I know they are related to some extent with funding sources and things like that, but try to maintain some focus as well to the environmental side of things, and again begin to look at the broader picture of beyond the asbestos, things like cleaning and mold and things along those lines. So I guess I could work with Virginia to publish an agenda prior to the next meeting. And then is it safe to say that the secretary is responsible for meeting minutes, documenting action items, things along those lines?
They will be circulated this afternoon, Mr. Cobley. I've taken notes throughout the meeting. Once I knew I was the secretary, might be a bit sketchy before I knew I was the secretary, but now I know I'm the secretary. I've kept notes through the meeting. They'll be typed up and distributed to you today. I would suggest the normal procedure would be to circulate them to the people who were on this meeting. And I may solicit Virginia's help on this, please, Ginny, to do that. Once people have approved them, I would assume they'd be published on the website.
It certainly sounds good to me. Is there any issues with doing that?
I see no reason that they couldn't be shared on the Environmental Task Force page that's been created on the district website. And I also think it would be appropriate for Director Hume to bring this forward as a report during our board meetings.
I will. I would probably suggest, Katie, as I've taken, that I wouldn't read the minutes. I just give a brief report on the meeting.
Yeah, just a brief synopsis would be helpful.
Yeah, and I will put in the bottom of it your suggestions, Mr. Cobley, that about what you think we should cover. When we circulate these for meeting participants' comments, if anyone wanted to add what things they think should be added, both on the mission statement, which sounds so exciting, like going to the moon, the mission statement and the agenda items for next month's meeting, then I could probably incorporate those into the final minutes.
I think that would be excellent. As far as reconvening, do we want to, what's the consensus, another 2 weeks, or should we wait a month? Or I guess from Kachardi, how soon do you think we'd hear back from the EPA?
So I can't answer that. I believe you won't hear in 2 weeks.
Okay. So I suggest we meet again in 2 weeks, and we could try to hash out the objectives, mission statement and objectives, and the updates on Northeast and the EPA will likely be late, given that it's only a 2 week turnaround.
Yeah, Mr. Cobley, it might be, and again, it's up to the committee and of course you, but if you would like, we could have Mr. Puglisi join us, and he can give you an update on his 6-month reassessments if you would like an overview. Again, totally up to you, but
that'd be great. And his 6-month assessments and just the general management plans status.
okay, Paul, can you make sure that happens, please?
Yes, absolutely. Now, Missy, 2 weeks from today, we were scheduled to have a principals meeting in the morning. I don't know if that's going to change or if we're doing it virtually, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, the good thing is I'm just, Katie, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not necessarily have to be on all these calls. So as long as Paul is on, I can continue with the principals meeting.
Yep, I think that's fine.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I will absolutely, when available, be here, but I'm imagining, Paul, we'll need that. I'm going to keep that principals meeting for now. Or I can move it to a little bit later in the day. We'll go from there. But as long as you're on, I think we're okay.
So that would be April 15 at 8 a.m.?
Yes.
Okay. One other question. The report that Rocco gave us at the beginning, will that be going up on the website under the Environmental Task Force heading?
It certainly can. I mean, there's no reason not to put it out there.
Well, I feel that we need to be as transparent as we absolutely possibly can.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and I think if we could put that up, that would save me having to detail everything that was in that.
Sure.
In the minutes, and it would be available then to the concerned public.
Sure.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Ghost.
Jenny, you'll send out an invitation for April 15th?
Yes, do you still want me to arrange the Zoom, or did someone else want to take that over? It doesn't matter to me.
Please, can you? The chances of my organizing a Zoom meeting, Jenny, are about as good as winning Miss America.
I'll take care of it. 8 o'clock, April 15th, correct?
Yeah.
Right, and add Carl to the invitation list, please.
You got it.
Thank you.
You're wonderful as usual.
Here. What's that?
Okay, so unless there's anything else, we could move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great
Thank
day,
you, everybody.
everybody.
Too.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Everybody stay healthy.
You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.